Welcome to Power Brain, Power Life. As you all know, we're learning so much about the brain and brain science and neuroscience. And I just continue to love to talk to people who know infinitely more than me. And with that said, I am extremely excited to have Dr. Kelly Lambert with me today. She's a professor of behavioral neuroscience at the University of Richmond in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, and is the author of many books, including the book that I discovered her on, The Lab Rat Chronicles, but more recently, a book called Well Grounded. So welcome, Dr. Lambert. Welcome, Kelly.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely. So let's just start with, let's do exactly what I shouldn't do, which is immediately start asking you questions about the book that I haven't read yet. So let's start with Well Grounded. This is, my understanding is that the focus is on rational decision-making when it comes to humans. So walk us through kind of the premise of the book and some of your learnings.
Right. So I have a rodent laboratory. So I've learned a lot from rats and brains about adaptive behaviors and smart informed behaviors. So I wanted to take that a little bit further. You mentioned the Lab Rat Chronicles and think about really what brains do. And we know that they keep us alive. They, keep our heart beating and our hormones secreting and doing all of that. But then there's these decisions. How do we determine, whether or not to order this thing for dinner or another on the menu, or to marry this person, or to have kids, or to have a career in this, or to read this book or that? And so I wanted to explore how the brain makes these decisions. And it focuses a good bit on our experiences and how the brain learns from our experiences, and also emphasizes the importance of authentic environments and experiences. And I think that's kind of relevant now when we keep hearing about fake data and virtual this and not actual. So the brain needs real input. And if the input is distorted, it can distort the brain's ability to make informed decisions. We wouldn't want to breathe in toxic, polluted air to keep healthy lungs. So we don't want to continually bring in distorted, fake news or information, because it doesn't allow, the brain doesn't have the proper material or resources to make the most informed decisions. So we need to be careful about authentic environments that are healthy. Some authentic environments can be very scary and traumatic, but as we get into a virtual world where it's less stimulating for our brains, that has all these senses, our skin is our largest organ on our body, and all this virtual stuff, communication that we've had to do during the pandemic. We have to make cost benefit analyses, but we're a little bit deprived. I keep saying in my classes, we have these blended classes, and so some are on Zoom, some are in person, but they're not really in person because I have a mask on, they have a mask, they're 100 feet away from me. It's just unsatisfying. I can't express myself, I can't hear them, I can't shake their hands or hug them. And so we're getting a little cheated. Our brains are cheated in that way, but it really focuses on authentic environments that gives true information to the brain. I made an analogy to kind of the real estate bubble or market when things get inflated and they don't really represent the true value. We could have brain bubbles that get inflated when we don't have people to tell us, you're not the smartest person in the world, or you're not the most beautiful. And we need to be grounded. And that's the well-grounded part, so that we are more realistic in our expectations and our behaviors. So that's a little snippet of it.
No, that's great. It actually, so that brings me to one of the things that you write about midway through the Rat Chronicles was all of the research on the rat park. And I'll set it up I'll do a very small setup, and then you can expand it from there. So some researchers were looking into environments that dealt with, I think addiction initially, but one of the light bulb moments was, well, wait a minute, they're in the control group and the variable group are in the exact same environment. What if we gave one of the environments like the Disney World for rats? How did it go from there?
Right. So that work came out of some disappointment with addiction research. And we have National Institute of Drug Abuse. We have money that goes to looking at this research done with rodents. And rodents, like humans, they'll press a bar to get cocaine or different drugs. And the disappointing part is, and this is the same with a lot of psychiatric illnesses, we just have not found a cure or really an acceptable, reasonable treatment for almost even depression. We have antidepressants, but they don't work for everyone and it's variable. But addiction, we just hadn't made much progress. So the team of researchers who did that, Bruce Alexander, I believe, in Canada, they thought, well, maybe they're just getting the drugs because they're just bored. They're sitting in this shoebox kind of cage. There's nothing else to do. I guess anybody would try something a little bit different. So he created this rat park, and it was, he painted trees and put cans, and they had other animals. It had large space so they could move around and exercise. And animals that had previous history with a drug, like morphine, when they were in Rat Park, his research suggested that they were happy with water. They didn't need the drug-laced water. And if they didn't have an addiction history coming into it, it was difficult to get them to take the drug. So he was making they were making the argument that if you have a more dynamic, enriched, engaging environment, you may be less likely to want the stimulation from the drugs when the environment provides that stimulation. And so I thought that was quite profound.
It sounds like it's a pretty big breakthrough because it's focusing less on, the substance and more around the environment, that it's, that maybe we've been looking at it the opposite way, just exclusively exploring the substance. There's, you also speak a lot about, and this is really interesting, both in COVID world, but also just in a kind of a digital screen first generation that's growing up. You wrote a lot about the social diplomacy of rats and how that kind of, these are my words, that kind of just playtime is critically important. So as we're talking about getting kids back in school and getting them off of screens, what were some of the findings in those instances?
Yeah, well, so the play is some of my favorite research. And again, rats, when you have young rats and they've been separated and you put them together, it's called rough and tumble play. So it's very physical, it's very actual, no virtual about it. So they pull the tails and they bite each other, but not really aggressive bites. They're testing the waters. How much can I bite you before you bite me back? Or how hard can I pull your tail? Or will you chase me if I run? So they're learning like kids playing in real play, not where parents are watching them and they can't touch each other or do anything to harm themselves, but real play, the way we did growing up in Alabama. It's kind of benign neglect that our parents did. Bye, honey, I'll see you tonight. And we were literally swinging from buns and breaking glass and all this stuff, but we're learning about testing the waters for our environment. And that's physical environment. How far can you walk out on this limb, and when things break, and how high can I jump? And social environment. You're learning about, how to read faces and moods and caring about each other. And when a laugh is something funny or a cry is pretend or it's real, those are very complex things to learn. And I've been frustrated being we're on Zoom now, but when three people talk at once and you're not able to provide those subtle cues that you would in the room together, where you just kind of look a certain way and you would know, oh, that person wants to speak, or they'll move their finger or something like that. So you have all these awkward no, you go. So we didn't grow up with this type of interaction. So the social interactions and environmental interactions are incredibly important as we navigate our way through life and our environments and our social relationships. And if you deprive rats of play, if you raise them in cages by themselves so they don't have that social interaction, and you put them together, they play more than rats that are already housed together, as if they're making up for lost time, or they'll eat more when they're hungry. And it's been correlated with some really healthy, brain plasticity and such. So again, that goes back to that virtual, authentic interaction. Zoom and digital interactions, they have their place and they can be valuable in certain ways, but we need to balance it all with the virtual and actual and authentic, I believe.
Absolutely. And something that I read even a few weeks ago that's really stuck with me is, in a virtual environment, in a more traditional human environment, you're building social connections through hallway interactions or seeing people at church or the gym. But in this virtual environment, you're actually giving social, you're having to write a check for it versus receiving it, which is also
Right.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me about, you had another study in the book around the worker versus the trust fund rats, which of course visually you can't get past that. That's hilarious in the first place. But
Yeah.
walk everyone through that, the learnings in those scenarios.
Right. So we have a grant now by the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH, supporting our work. So this is work we're trying to build emotional resilience that may protect, and we're working with rodent models and thinking we can translate, or hoping to translate, to human models. If we can build emotional resilience, it may make us less susceptible to depression when we meet those or encounter challenges that may be the tipping point between mental health and mental illness. So I was interested years ago in why depression rates are continuing to increase. And to this day, they're not getting better. We have a multi-billion-dollar antidepressant industry. So we have lots of drugs that should help, but we have cardiovascular drugs and HIV drugs and diabetes drugs for diabetes, and deaths related to those conditions are reducing. But with all this that we have for depression, we're not making a lot of progress. And so those drugs are trying, they target a neurochemical known as serotonin, and we're told that we have an imbalance and maybe this is restoring the balance. But if that's the case and we're taking the drugs, we should see some improvement. So I was just frustrated. I was writing one of those nerdy textbooks, clinical neuroscience, and I was covering all the literature in depression, and I said, these drugs, we just seem to be missing the target. And I became interested in what may be going on with depression. And so I got kind of taken back with this variable of lifestyle. I mean, I don't think in the last 60 or 70 years, our neurochemicals have really changed, like serotonin levels. We haven't mutated, I don't think, or evolved into another variation, but our lifestyles have changed a lot. Just thinking, I write about in my book, Lifting Depression, which was my first book, a mainstream book. I write about my grandparents in Alabama. They never sat still. They were always, when in their downtime, they were shelling peas or shucking corn or working in their garden. And they felt horrible if they were sick or something and they couldn't plant a garden. It was their privilege. And they were so proud to do that. And then canning the food and freezing the food. They were reminded of their efforts, throughout the year. And so I started to think about movement and how in our society today, prosperity is sometimes thought of as an ability to pay other people to do everything for us, to cook our food for us, to decorate our houses for us, to make our clothes for us, to drive us around. And you have arrived, and your brain is sitting pretty if it can hire all these people to do this. But the brain evolved, as we were talking, to be interact with the environment, play and such. And as we interact with the environment through gardening or building or cooking or knitting, we are producing a product, a hat, a meal, vegetables, or harvesting that. And our brain can see a reward. And so it starts to make connections between the effort, I planted this, I made this, I knitted this, and that reward. And so the area of our brain involved in reward systems has strong connections to the middle part of our brain that's involved in movement. So movement may be related to reward in this way. And it made me think that if we got to a place where our lifestyle, we're not moving around a lot. I'm sitting in this chair. I have a long time today. we're not moving around a lot, and we're not engaging in tasks where we see a tangible, award or output. I may write all day and I'm not sure what that really is. It's not a plate of food or something like that. So we can build these called effort-based reward connections by doing some of these hobbies, engaging in some of these hobbies or physical interactions with our environment. And this increases our sense of control. And then maybe when we meet a challenge, we go, like my daughters will say, I've got this, Mom, you've got this. And you feel a little bit more secure, because stress is really detrimental to our emotional health. Almost every disorder, psychiatric disorder there is, stress is kind of a common denominator. So big background to get to your question of the worker and the trust fund rat. So I wanted to take this, my grandmother's gardening in Talladega, Alabama idea to the lab. And so our rats love Fruit Loops. It's not real fruit. It's not very natural, but it's Fruit Loops. So we just put them in an arena, and they have this bedding, and we make little mounds, and we bury the Fruit Loops. We teach them that, if you see a mound and you just gently dig, you get the Fruit Loops. So our experimental group, they have to work for their Fruit Loops. They look around, they see the mounds, they dig, and they get their Fruit Loops in their training session. The trust fund rats, they're what we call yoked to, they have a buddy rat that's in the experimental group, and they get the same number of Fruit Loops that their buddy earned, but it's, they get it no matter what. So they're like the trust fund rats. They didn't have to earn it. So their experiences are exactly the same. They were put into the arena for the same period of time. They were exposed to the same number of rewards, but the experimental group had to earn it. The reward was contingent on their behavior. The trust fund group just got it no matter what. So we call it contingent and non-contingent, if we want to be a little bit more sciencey about that. So what does that do? So we look at lots of different measures like stress hormones, and the contingent worker rats, when they're exposed to a challenge, they have healthier stress hormone profiles. We have cortisol as a stress hormone. They have a version of that. And then we look at something called DHEA that's released by our adrenal glands and their adrenal glands. And it kind of buffers the toxicity of the stress hormone. So if you look at those ratios, our contingent worker rats have healthier ratios. They have other evidence for neuroplasticity, some changes going on in their brains, and they can problem solve a little bit better. So it's not that our non-contingent animals are stupid and they can't learn, but the effort-based reward or the worker rats seem to have a little bit more, self-efficacy is a big word for a rat, but maybe a sense of agency, control. Control is probably safer to say, that may generalize to other new situations. So it's really exciting to me. We keep exploring new avenues with this paradigm of work, having our animals work for Fruit Loops.
Wow. That is fascinating. And I can think of some personal examples of me being on the worker side or on the trust fund.
So are you a trust fund rat, Matt, or a worker rat?
I am definitely a worker rat, unfortunately.
That means you're not, fortunately. Fortunately,
yes. Yeah. That's exactly right. So there's been a lot of literature, even in the mainstream press, let's just call it the last 6 months to a year, so I think people, especially when it comes to neuroscience, are the link between movement, as you described it, and brain health is becoming more clear as more studies come out. One of the questions I think that has entered the more mainstream discussion that someone like me would read versus you and your lab is that maybe not all movement is the same. I'm curious your perspective. Let's just put two scenarios: 2 hours on a treadmill, 2 hours on a walk in the woods. From the overall benefit, I would assume both are beneficial, but what are the differences and the nuances between those two scenarios?
So on the treadmill, you're going to have cardiovascular, increased cardiovascular activity. So you're going to increase blood, glucose, and oxygen to the brain as you've increased the circulatory system. And so that exercise can be very good for the brain. It's not really an intentional behavior. Maybe you're not learning anything, but just getting blood going into the the brain with the brain is an energy hog. It only makes up 2% of our total body weight, but requires 20% of the energy that we bring in it. So exercise, bringing those nutrients to the brain. Now, if you really get a kick and you're proud of, oh, I made it for 2 hours, or I can check this list with that achievement, you may have some extra kind of feel good, dopamine kind of endorphin kind of neurochemical events that would be healthy. So that's healthy. Now, walking in the woods or something, you're still increasing. You've got the output and the benefits of walking and being active and getting those nutrients to the brain. So that's great. But you're introducing nature. And nature is part of the environment that our brains evolved to interact with. And there's some really fascinating literature to suggest that nature is especially beneficial for the brain. And in fact, we have enriched environments for our animals, and we have natural enriched environments with dirt and rocks and sticks, and artificial enriched environments. I kind of call it the country and the city environments. But even with humans, there was a study done 2 years ago in Denmark where they have really great records of everyone's illness that they follow through for everyone, for their citizens' entire lives. And they found that if you grew up with, I forget how they defined it, but green space, so near a park or shrub, trees in your front yard, the way they defined it, you were 55% less likely to develop a psychiatric illness as an adult.
Wow.
That green exposure, and there's other research. If you have a plant in a hospital room, people, that's related more to pain, but they experience less pain, or having a window looking out. So nature plus exercise can really enhance both getting more nutrients to the brain and maybe calming the system down. So you're reducing stress in a better way, but there's in a more effective way. But then there's other movement like effort-based rewards would be like what we said, cooking or knitting. And that's more intentional, and that's gaining that sense of control or efficacy or agency, so that you're building resilience against those challenges that we're all going to face in the future. So movement can take on different varieties, and it all seems to be incredibly healthy for our brains, unless we overdo it. I don't know, ultra marathons, maybe not so much, but again, it's the context and individual differences. So, but our sedentary lifestyles is not great for us. So we need to make sure that we introduce time for exercise, for nature. I've got a wonderful window right here. Regardless if it's plants in our house or a park, or any way we can to try to balance out those environmental and our exercise and movement lifestyles that are active.
That's incredible. Well, I'll ask one more question before we wrap up. So in your in Well Grounded, your most recent book, you have all of the research, and then all of the capturing it all and going through the process with your editors. Once it was done, was there anything from that book that you, in your personal life or in your academic life, you keep going back to when it comes to rational decision making, that it's like, the whole book is important, but this little tidbit has been really interesting to me?
Yeah, not to get into our political climates and such, but it really does reinforce that we need authentic, true, grounded information in our lives, so that we don't create a bubble where we think that we're great on all these levels. We think that we're the best scientist and the best parent and the best athlete. You may be, but make sure you have good data telling you you are, and really value friends and family who can, in a nurturing way, give you the real the real deal is important for our brains. Because if we build up this bubble and we think we're someone we're not, we can crash when something, bursts that bubble open. We're going to fall further, like the crash of the stock market or the housing market, because it became so inflated and was growing based on false information, the crash was much bigger. So if we can stay grounded and really test the water, and this is what science does. It tests the waters and the hypotheses, and you're constantly saying, is this really true? So you want to get truth is not an absolute. We're always changing, and I don't know if it's improving, but changing the story, because our lives, time is changing. But it really reinforces the fact that we need accurate information, and we need to test and make sure that between cause and effect, that we have good data to support this. Otherwise, we're going to have what I call in the book brain bubbles, and they're going to burst, and we're going to be more likely to really have this emotional crash.
What a terrific way to kind of put a fine point on it. And correct me if I'm wrong, the burden is in that situation, the burden's really on you, the individual, to make sure that you're not crafting this world that's one step removed, that part of our human expectation should be to be asking for that feedback, to building up that trust from our social configurations. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. And humans, we're animals, and we have brains just like, well, not just like the rats, but they're built in similar ways, and other primates. But something that sets us apart from other animals and even other primates and even other apes is this cortex. The outside covering of our brain has more neurons than any other animal on the planet, including animals with bigger brains like elephants and whales. Wow. So this cortex is where a lot of decisions, those rational decisions, that's a home for it. So we have more cells, more capability based on these cells. So you're right. It's up to us, and it's hard work. It's easy to say, oh, that made me feel good, and I don't really want to know. Don't tell me the truth, but I want to feel good about this. So we have to employ these top-down, processes to get to the truth, so that we are working in an actual environment and not some virtual environment that just makes us feel good. And that's hard work. That's education. That's hypothesis testing. It's stepping back and reevaluating and recalibrating, and being able to adapt to new environments. So if anything kind of taps into intelligence or informed rational decisions, it's going to be that. But it's easier to just sit back and say, tell me more. But we need to know the truth. The truth is important.
That's exact. And I'll just put it out there. It also takes a little cushioning of one's ego.
Yes.
To be asking for that direct, honest feedback. It's not easy for any human.
Right.
Well, Dr. Lambert, thank you so much for this time. This has been highly illuminating, so much fun for me. I hope the rest of our viewers and listeners feel the same way. Don't forget to pick up either the Lab Rat Chronicles or her new book.
Well Grounded.
Well Grounded, absolutely.
So it's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Right. Good. Bye.